Gwen Stefani is a lot of things: pop star, fashion designer, and coach on NBC's The Voice. One thing she isn't is Japanese, though it hasn't stopped the singer from claiming that she is and profiting from its culture repeatedly throughout her career. There was her 2004 album, Love Angel Music Baby, which was heavily inspired by Japan's Harajuku subculture and the 4 Japanese and Japanese American backup dancers she hired to help promote this album. Then in 2008, she launched a fragrance line called Harajuku Lovers, sold in bottles made to look like Stefani and her backup dancers. And then just last week, when given a chance to reflect on those projects, well, Stefani doubled down, telling Allure magazine that after a trip she took to Japan several years back, she told herself, quote, "My God, I'm Japanese and didn't know it." Well, neither did the rest of us, probably because Stefani is really Irish and Italian American. So in this week's segment, we wanted to talk about this, especially Stefani's claims that have fed into the age-old conversation of cultural appropriation seen across the music and entertainment industries. So joining me now is Sam Hyun, the former chairperson of the Massachusetts Asian American Commission. He also served on the leadership team for the Hate is a Virus, a national campaign combating anti-Asian hate. And Candace McDuffie, she is senior writer at The Root. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having us, Crystal.
All right, so let's get into it, because we just named some what I would call alarming examples of cultural appropriation. And so, Sam, it appears that, you know, she's doubling down on this claim and has no regard for the harm that it is causing Asian and specifically Japanese communities.
Yeah, I think first I want to start by saying that I don't, speak for the entire, Asian diaspora and the Asian American community. But I think this is a problem that we continuously see over and over again, is when folks are called out or called in for, harmful behavior, that rather than, reflect and listen to the folks who are saying this to you, a lot of defensiveness and doubling down. And so oftentimes it's adding more fuel to the fire and, kind of more pain on top of, we've expressed how we feel to you, and then yet you're continuously dismissing us and rather, invalidating what we are saying to you.
And Candace, you've been covering music and pop culture for years. I've read a lot of your work. I mean, what did you think when you heard these claims, this what seemed like a cavalier, comment in a major report?
The fact that she even said the phrase, I'm Japanese, to an Asian woman who was interviewing her demonstrated her lack of self-awareness, her lack of remorse, and her lack of ability to do the work to really interrogate why appropriating Japanese aesthetics is just wrong, especially in 2023, now that these conversations are being had at such a consistent and open and important level.
Well, I also want to pull up another quote here. When speaking to Allure about her admiration and use of Japanese culture, Stefani said, quote, "If people are going to criticize me for being a fan of something beautiful and sharing that, then I just think that doesn't feel right. It should be okay to be inspired by other cultures, because if we are not allowed, then it is dividing people," right? This is the question she poses to the journalist. It seems it's more than just this admiration piece. She is profiting from a culture and has done so for years.
Yeah, and I'm sure she'll point to the donations that she's made to charitable organizations, but at the end of the day, it pales in comparison to the profitability, and it also, again, I think, points to the lack of self-awareness of the intent versus impact. And as Asian Americans, we have consistently been discriminated for simply just for who we are, right? No other fact alone, except for the fact that we are Asian American, we're being targeted, we've been attacked, we've been killed. And not to mention, when you see, someone like Gwen Stefani, who is able to generate so much revenue, and you see folks who are Asian American continue to struggle just to have opportunities, it's incredibly painful to watch and experience. And that's the part that makes it difficult, is I don't think that she intentionally is trying to cause harm. But when you're not listening and you're continuously getting defensive, that's the part where folks get really frustrated and angry.
Candace, in a time of, and you mentioned this, in 2023, in a time where cancel culture is alive and well, it seems as though Gwen Stefani has escaped this to some degree. And it's been, I mean, we were citing examples from 2004, 2008, this most recent example. How does she fly under the radar while continuing to appropriate this culture?
She's protected by the shield of white womanhood. If it was a woman of color who said something like that, I believe that the repercussions would have been much more dire, right? She'll get a bit of a backlash and, you know, people will talk about it. We'll have segments like these, but then she'll go back to hosting The Voice and going on tour and selling out shows because she has that shield of whiteness to protect her from ignorance, from cultural appropriation. It's nothing new in pop culture. So I think, you know, Gwen Stefani knows what she's saying, knows what she's doing, and still won't ever really face any harsh, real consequences for it.
Well, I mean, I want to cite some other examples because Stefani's not the only person doing this. We have Kim Kardashian, who famously wore cornrows and defended that. We have Katy Perry in 2013. She wore a geisha costume to the AMAs. I mean, all of these people are still very rich and very much profited against the appropriation here. And it seemed like the conversation didn't lead to any change. They continue to do this.
I think, too, what's so infuriating about it is that, you know, as mentioned earlier, Asian American people are dying in this country because of racism. You know, when the former president, Donald Trump, said, you know, COVID-19 is, you know, the China virus, and we saw the uptick in racial violence against Asian Americans, Gwen Stefani didn't say anything. Katy Perry, she was silent. And I feel like the problem is you extract their aesthetic and their beauty, their culture for money. And then when it comes to actually standing in solidarity with these people, when they actually need it, when their lives depend on it, you don't say anything. And that's what bothers me so much about cultural appropriation from these artists.
Sam, speak to me about that because it has got to cause an enormous amount of harm here.
Yeah, and I think part of the other, you know, part is why I want to bring up is oftentimes we have these conversations. What will also happen is then someone will go and speak to somebody in Japan or in Asia and be like, well, do you have a problem with this? And then they'll be like, well, I don't understand the problem. I don't see the issue, but it's taking out so much context and nuance, right? And this is a very, you know, topic that context and nuance is so critically important. And you're talking to folks in Japan who are, you know, part of the majority, and they're, you know, it's a very homogenous society over there. And so they haven't experienced racial discrimination here in the United States. And they don't understand why it is so frustrating to watch time and time again. You see someone like Gwen Stefani, who is a white woman, continuously profit off of the back and the culture that is not hers. But yet you see folks from your own community continue to be shut out, right? We saw this with Michelle Yeoh, right? Michelle Yeoh and everything all at once is now being, you know, celebrated and elevated. But it took her 40 years to get to that point when she's been brilliant from the beginning. We've seen this happen to Black women consistently, right? We see this happen to folks of color consistently. And so this isn't just an Asian American issue. It's a much broader conversation and that we're just not having at the level that it needs to be, because I do understand and recognize and can appreciate the fact that it is very nuanced and it can get difficult to understand. But the effort at this point in 2023, as Candace mentioned, it's 2023. You can make the effort to learn.
Well, I mean, I feel like you can make the effort, especially if you're making tens of millions of dollars on the backs of people's culture. How difficult is it to have this conversation in the music industry to your thinking, Candace?
You know, as Sam just mentioned, we see it happen with Black artists all the time. This is why Miley Cyrus or a Justin Timberlake or even a Katy Perry, again, can sit here and dip into Black culture when it's convenient for them. It's a dog whistle sometimes for depravity, a dog whistle for inappropriateness, for just being raunchy. And then when they made their point, they leave, take the money and they leave. And it happens over and over again. And then you have, untalented artists like Macklemore and Jack Harlow rapping. No talent, okay? And it's infuriating because you don't even want to sit here and study the art that you're trying to emulate for money. You just do what you got to do, take the money and leave. So it's going to happen, but it's so frustrating and so disheartening that it just continues. There's no real change in the industry.
What about this argument, and I think we've all heard this one time or another, is that, well, this is honoring this culture that people may not know about. What do you say to that?
I mean, why not then elevate the voices of the folks who are actually, part of the culture and doing it, right? Who have mastered it, who've studied it, who understand it and experienced it. It's not that any folks aren't welcome to enjoy Asian American culture, Asian culture, Korean culture, Japanese culture, Filipino culture, right? That's not what people are saying. But the thing is, there's a way in which to do it. And this is a culture, we're talking about cultural appropriation. So culture needs to be at the center of what we're talking about. And one of the core tenets of many Asian cultures is respect and tradition. And so, and this isn't just an Asian American cultural phenomenon or tenet, but in anything that you do, folks aren't going to be angry if you approach it with the kind of respect that it deserves, quite frankly. And when you come in and do it however you want, and then afterwards, when folks try to call you out on it, you double down and get defensive. That is showing a direct sign of disrespect, and that is where a lot of folks draw the line. I guarantee most people aren't upset if you genuinely make an attempt to try to ingratiate yourself and learn the culture the right way. But if you don't, that's when people get upset and people are justified.
Yeah. Candace, in our last 30 seconds or so, how do we do better with this?
I think we need to continue to hold these people accountable, and it needs to happen at a higher level. We can talk about it. We can talk about it on social media and here and different forums, but there needs to be real, true accountability. And often that comes in the form of them losing money. Take away the profits, and I bet you it'll stop.
Well, that's certainly one way to do it. Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. Candace McDuffie and Hyun, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Just such an important conversation to have.